a poet that I really like called Reka. She said once that if you cannot be kind, being fair is okay. So when you look on the values of the 4 values of IFOAM, fairness is the most undefined one. Raises a lot of philosophical questions, like what is fair in different cultures, who are we to decide if things are fair or not. On these questions and more, we will have 3 very distinguished speakers. First one is Nadia El-Hajj. Nadia is working on the tension between feeding the world population and taking care of tomorrow environment. She's doing that under the FAO, which is a United Nations organization. She is responsible to a lot of the FAO regulations since in the last 10 years. And the newest one is the full cost accounting methodology for food and beverage. Nadia, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
Dear friends, it's always very hard to speak after lunch because people are a bit tired. I'm very happy to be here, also because let's say that I started a bit here in Vignola in 1999 when we were invited by Antonio on a conference on biodiversity, and that was also the year when, for the very first time, the government of the world decided to put organic in an official FAO program. So Vignola has sown the seed of organic at FAO, so it did a great job. If you allow me to do so, I will keep talking in English.
So when we talk about fairness, fairness is not less than being kind. It's a very basic issue, and we live in an unfair world. When you look at the food system, we do have today enough kilocalories per capita worldwide, but we still have 795 million people who go hungry every day. This is 12.9% of the world population. In areas like in South Asia, it's 35% of the population. And India has enough kilocalories per capita in that nation. So we do have a very unfair food system. Now in FAO, in our latest food insecurity statistics, now we have 2 main indicators for hunger. One is the number of kilocalories, and this is where you have the number of hungry. This is the 2015 figures that you have here. But now we have another indicator which is as important, which is the undernutrition of children under 5 years old. And this is really about food quality. In areas like in North Africa, for example, you have enough starchy food and calories for the population, but you have the highest prevalence of undernourished children under 5. So I think there is more and more attention now to diversity and to diets, and not only in feeding calories to people and saying, well, they are food secure. And what you all also know is that we have another 2 billion people in the world who are malnourished. Malnourished means undernutrition, which is lack of iron and vitamins and what have you, or overnutrition, and this is where you have obesity and other problems that we all know. So we are really in an unfair food system beyond productivity. In this presentation, I'm going to focus as much as possible on the principle of fairness and not so much address health. Now, another thing are the trading practices. We have deeply unfair trading practices. With globalization of trade, we have an unfair competition, and we have more and more primary producers and agricultural workers who are really given crumbles of the net returns. And we see, what's the percentage of the price that they get is really small. This is when they're not losing their lands and when they are not pushed into despair. The International Workers Association has classified, at least in 2012 when I met with them, agriculture as the most hazardous employment activity. It's a sector where more people die, where more people are facing inequities and unsafe working conditions. So when we talk about fair trading practices, we are really referring to the right of producers to have access to markets where they can negotiate the price, a price that is stable, based on true cost, and where they have agreements and contracts which are long-term and include a process for settling dispute, free from retaliation, and also in a mutually agreed manner. And as you all know, and yesterday we had the session on legality and fairness, this is not always the case. We have many cases of retaliation and unfair things that are happening and that we see every day. Now, when we look at the IFOAM principle of fairness, it says that organic agriculture should build on relationships that ensure fairness with regard to the common environment and life opportunities. So I'm trying to look at that and see what are the opportunities that we see today in the organic sector. First of all, and this is a value that should not be forgotten, organic avoids harm. More and more farmers have debts and they are committing suicide. You have the famous number of the 30,000 farmers who have committed suicide in Maharashtra in India. And this is also a dated figure. This is from 1997 to 2005. And some analysts say, well, you know, in India, the farmer's suicide is kind of endemic. It's not a big problem. Well, I was in New Zealand last month, and the rich dairy farmer are committing suicide. In the area where I was, 9 suicides happened. It's still secret. It's not in the media, but it's coming because of deaths in conventional farming. The good side of it, if we can say the good side, is that now Fonterra is promoting conversion to organic farming because the organic dairy has a stable price. Anyway, the other problem with, that is avoided with organic agriculture is that you have less pesticide poisoning. We have heard before about pesticide residues, but we do have still much more than the GMO damages that we talk about, and we should not forget that. At least 3 million people per year who are poisoned by pesticide, especially workers in the fields. And this is resulting in 220,000 people who die. And this is, again, a quite dated figure from WHO, some years ago, I mean. So if we look now, it will be higher. Now, one study which I released last month, this one, Natural Capital Impact on Agriculture, actually, thanks, David, for recalling me to bring it. We have tried to look at the natural capital costs of conventional agriculture. We took the 4 most important crops and the 4 most important livestock species, which are providing for about 80% of trade and of food anyway. And we have seen that crop production is costing annually 1.15 trillion, not million, not billion, trillion US dollar per year. And this is 170% of the production cost. Now, if we look at animals, again, we have another $1.18 trillion of natural capital which is lost every year because of conventional livestock production. So on average, we could say that the impact factor of conventional agriculture on nature is 1.5. Now, if we put also the social aspect, it's going to be even higher in terms of real cost of what the food is costing us to be produced. So between arable soil which is lost, water which is contaminated, biodiversity, pandemics, food scares, greenhouse gas emission, we do have many, many problems that are avoided by choosing organic management. I have been in the last 15 years or so documenting many case studies from all over the world, and I can say quite confidently that organic agriculture is improving livelihoods everywhere. It has, on average, it gives more employment, about 30%. It's a world average, so but of course it varies. And labor is actually the only asset that the poor have. This is the only thing that they have and they can use better. But even in richer countries, when you don't have employment opportunities, it is important to have those employment opportunities in rural areas. Also because, in this case, the return on labor input is higher on organic farms. And of course, when farmers are able to go on the market, you are commercializing a system by using existing resources, existing natural resources, existing labor, and you have more independence from external inputs. Another aspect of the non-commercial agriculture, which is more in the market marginalized areas, where the poor don't have access to input nor to market to sell, by doing ecological intensification, you are providing more food for the local people and you are relocalizing the food system. And the best example I have always is Tigray, which was suffering from hunger in the early 80s, in which today is food secure thanks to organic methods. So the organic systems tend to reconnect people to their communities, to their land, to their culture, and to their culinary heritage, and we can see that everywhere. A 2009 study we did at FAO was looking at the profitability of organic systems. And again, in that case, we looked at 54 long-term case studies, and we could say also quite confidently that the economic performance of those systems is higher than conventional farms. Usually, there are lower production costs, and there are better returns, even without price premium. So the higher market prices account for the profits, which vary from 40 to 75% for arable farms and from 10 to 48% for dairy farms. So lower production costs or price premium compensate for reduced yield in organic systems and gives higher net return in both developing and developed countries. So now constraints. Of course, there's not only benefits, there are always constraints, and we are all here to improve. Commodification. The sector has been growing in two-digit, we have heard it, for a while now, and it has entered lucrative international markets. And today, we should not really talk about the price premium, but the premium profit of food which has become a commodity. Already in the 2000s, but maybe 97, 98, you could see, and this is documented by Rafi in USA, the giant agri-food corporations have started acquiring organic enterprises. Coca-Cola, Cadbury, Dean Food, Cargill, Danone, General Mills, Kellogg's, Kraft, Mars, they all have an organic line. Now, the bad part of it is that they buy an organic enterprise, but they keep the same brand. So the consumers don't know that it has been bought by these giants. You still think, for example, in the US, that Cascadian Farm has this nice hippie type of image of the organic. It is organic, yes, but it is a monoculture organic, and many of the allowed substances have been longer on the list of those enterprises because it has been bought by General Mills. Oversize is another problem. These large companies, they are all having more and more profit. But at the same time, you can see that the farmer's income is reduced. In the US a few years ago, it was $1,500 per year that farmers were getting less, when the same enterprises was getting much more net profit on their organic sales. So what's happening is that the company is making more money, but they are cutting on the contract that they have with producers. So you have a growth of the sector, but the benefit is not really going to those who are producing the food. And also retailers, they have large warehouses, they need to have contracts and to have big quantities coming. Processors, they need a certain uniformity in their, for the crops that they want to process, and they prefer also to have large producers. So what's happening is that the family farms, small farm, but also big individual farmers are cut out of that system, which is industrialized, and they don't have any more bargaining rights. So can we have fair organic and perhaps lead sustainability? Well, I have 3 suggestions here. Well, the organic community has social justice, and we talk about fairness, but it's not in the standards. There should be ways by which it is incorporating these kind of values, especially of the pricing transparency throughout the industry segment. So really moving from the principle to the practice. Consumers should be educated on the food. Who is producing that food? Where is it produced? And most importantly, what is the cost of that food? And also it's really time to link the organic label with the fair trade and other legitimate labels that exist out there, and have a joint work between the ecological and social movements and expand and be the leaders of this in the sustainability marketplace. Now, 2 years ago, I have released the FAO Guidelines on Sustainability. It's called SAFA, Sustainability Assessment for Food and Agriculture System. This is not for organic, this is for the whole food sector. Of course, it's voluntary, but increasingly enterprises are liking to use that kind of system. So there is sustainability from an environmental, social, and economic point of view, but also from a good governance point of view. I'm not going to go through the SAFA, but I want to tell you that these guidelines, which are for the whole of agriculture, have a lot of these kind of issues that we would cover under a fairness kind of requirement. For example, if you look at the social well-being pillar, under this one, you have, for example, which is based on rights, you have the fair trading practices that include responsible buyers, right of suppliers, but also you have the freedom of association and the right of bargaining, and other issues that you can read for yourself here on the social well-being. Well, in SAFA, we have also another pillar, which is the good governance, and under good governance, you have the rule of law, which includes also civic responsibility, resource appropriation against the land grabs, legitimacy, remedy, and so forth. So what I'm trying to say is that the conventional sector is moving towards sustainability, and even Global Gap now has grasped, the whole food system is trying to have some kind of fairness kind of principles. These teams and sub-teams, by the way, do have indicators for looking at the performance at the farm level. So you don't need to go and look of how you do that. I mean, this has been a participatory process of development with stakeholders. So there's a lot of things that one can take from existing tools to look at sustainability from a social perspective. So going back to my 3 suggestions, the first one is on social accountability, the second one on labeling, and the third one on cooperation. I was very happy yesterday to see in the pre-conference that I have attended that many of these issues are already addressed by some pioneers in the organic community here in this room. So yesterday was an important day for me, and when I talked with some of my friends, not everybody's aware of what's happening, so I thought that I added this slide on my presentation. There's this leading organic alliance, which has a working group on social accountability, which is already looking into how to implement the IFOAM norms for social justice. I think this is a very, very important and timely exercise. But also we have seen from our friends from Puglia that they're working on the protocol of intent for the living conditions of the agricultural workers. And similarly, in Calabria, Gould Bio is working on an ethical protocol for the workers' legality, so you don't have illegal and mafia type of activities going on the farm. So these are all, and I think there were many more examples which were here yesterday. I wish they were doing this conference now instead of me, because this is really laudable work. So there is a movement going towards putting in practice fairness within the organic standard. The other point was about labeling, and last week when I was at Expo, Nature and More presented the work that they are doing with regard to sustainability flour, where they're going to start including true cost accounting. And I think this is going to be very important to have such type of information for a more moral market. So looking ahead, and looking more also backwards, historically, we all know that the organic movement has been pioneering what is happening today and what all eco-labels have done after that. However, this initial impulse, which was social and environmental, has lost on its way the social claim, I would say. No, it's really about the ecological claim, the health claim, the product claim, but the social claim has been a bit lost on the path. So effective cooperation now is overdue between the organic, fair trade, and other ethical movements. And I personally hope that Organic 3.4 will evolve our community toward more of a social agriculture, where we don't really differentiate, maybe this I'm more organic or less organic, but to have really a social agriculture which is really away from that logic of competitiveness, which is destroying our planet. And with this, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nadia. Next speaker, Ian Bretman. Ian is coming to us from the UK. Spent a few years with the Social Association, which is the UK organic organization. During his time in the Social Association, I'm sure you were exposed to the demands of the local supermarkets and their demands also for fairness and the chapters that they added to their audits. And now Ian is with the Fair Trade, also advising and helping growers around the globe to meet the standards. Ian.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I should say that I am speaking for Fair Trade. I've worked with Fair Trade International and its affiliates now for nearly 20 years. I've been involved with the movement for international development and trade for some 30 years. And I would certainly like to echo what Nadia had just said about the need for greater collaboration between fair trade and organic. In our standards, we have a recognition of organic production as best practice, but we don't really do a lot more than that. So in my work in the UK, I've been very proud to have tried to build those connections through working voluntarily with the Soil Association on their standards board. But I have to say the real champion, I think, in Europe of bridging these two worlds is our friend Antonio Compagnoni, the Vice Chair of Fair Trade Italia, a member of Fair Trade International's Standards Committee, and known to all of you as somebody who's driving force behind all the issues that we're discussing here. And Antonio has pressed all of us in Fair Trade to do more about stepping up to that challenge that Nadia just mentioned. And that's really what I want to talk about today, because I think Nadia's already talked a lot about the principles of fairness and the connections. We all know those. And some of the other speakers have also highlighted the issues of the connections between fairness and sustainability. Our view is that you cannot have sustainability without fairness. They are just two sides of the same coin. And we need to get that message over to more and more people, because there's, as Nadia said, the mainstream world, the political and commercial world is talking all the time about sustainability. In our work in Fair Trade, we're working with companies who employ more people just in their one company dealing with some of these sustainability issues than we have working with us worldwide on some of these challenges. So they're certainly taking it seriously, but I'm not sure they're really getting to grips with the true challenges that we face. And a lot of that is about working holistically. That's what I think organic has always done. That's what Fair Trade has tried to do, to take that, to look at that bigger picture. Because it's going back to what we're going to mention this morning about the competitive pressures in agricultural markets. Yes, it's true that larger producers, in the terms set by the conventional market, are more efficient. So I've been arguing for years with economists who say that fair trade is simply trying to protect inefficient small-scale producers. But what they're doing is ignoring externalities. And as already mentioned, the real cost. When we look at true cost accounting, we can see what industrialized agriculture costs in terms of health and nutrition, in terms of environmental damage, and in terms of social damage in the communities that it works with. And somebody has to pick up that bill, and it's all of us in many ways. And I think if the world is serious about sustainability, then particularly the business community has to stop thinking about externalities. There are no externalities anymore. That's actually what sustainability means. And if we're not properly accounting for all the costs incurred from the very, very beginning of a supply chain, and even not just on farms, but in the communities around those farms, right through to the consumer and their family and their communities and their societies, if we don't take account of all those costs, we cannot have sustainability. And if we start looking at those costs through that lens, we will also see that the importance of fairness with people. And you can get very hung up on one of our jobs in fair trade, perhaps, is to try to codify fairness. And it sometimes feels like an impossible challenge because you know fairness when you see it. You don't really have to write rules. It's very much about treating other people as you would be prepared to be treated yourself. Very old concept that goes right back to the Bible. That's what fairness is. And it shouldn't be difficult for people to look at trading relationships, to look at power structures and ask the question, does it meet that test? Because in the vast majority of cases, it doesn't. And I also heard a comment this morning about being angry about some of this. And of course, we do have to work practically. We try to work in fair trade constructively with businesses to present our vision of the business case for fairness and sustainability. But the failure of people to consider that test of true fairness also makes me angry. People defend the current system on the basis that it's helped deliver more food to more people and turn a blind eye to the problems that it's created around obesity and scarcity of food in countries. In many cases, it's farmers who go hungry. So farmers do not earn enough from the food they produce to buy the food that they don't produce, because nobody is just a producer or a farmer. They're also consumers. And so it's very encouraging that more and more businesses have worked with us over the past 10 or 15 years in fair trade, including many of the companies that Nadia mentioned that are looking at organic and they're looking at fair trade. And in some ways we say, well, if they're going to do fair trade and they're going to buy their cacao or their coffee or their bananas under fair trade terms, that's good. We mustn't stand in the way of that, the progress and the fact that that is better than them not doing that. But we also have to make sure that we are really pushing them towards adopting that across the whole of their business and not just on little parts of it, because you can't divide fairness up in that way. And I'm not sure that that is happening. So it does make me angry that people still defend a system that drives inequality, that leaves farmers, particularly in developing countries, dependent on external support, on what, for any want of any other term, is charity. Companies will talk about how they're investing in schools, in social infrastructure, in helping communities have access to water. These are communities and these are people that produce something that we need more than anything else. Shelter, clothing and food are our basic necessities. So farmers should be some of the best off people in our world, not the poorest. And I don't see how you can defend a system where it only happens at that end. I think if chief executives of major food corporations also had to struggle to send their children to school, then we might say there's equity in the system. But they don't. And so that does make me angry, and I think we have to move on and find ways of really tackling this. We, in both organic and fair trade, we've done a huge amount of work to establish a foothold, to learn about some of the things that we're doing, to get some sense of best practice. And another comment I heard this morning was struggling to move out of this niche, out of to really make widespread change. And I think the point about that is we've got to do it together. So that was my starting point. I'm here because I've listened to Antonio, and I know that it's important for fair trade and organic to work better together. Other people are saying that as well. We can do more together than we can do separately. And particularly since it's not just the principles that hold us together, but also what I've heard this morning are some of the approaches that we are learning in fair trade, that you can't have a one-size-fits-all approach to these issues. They have to be put into context. You can't have a top-down approach. They have to be built from the bottom up through participative approaches that include all the different stakeholders, and particularly in farming communities around the world, where it's not just the farming problem. The biggest issue on fair trade's agenda the next few years, well, some of the biggest issues, climate change, which we share, the next generation farming issue. Most of the farmers we work with are old. They would not, in economic terms, want their children to go into farming. So we have a lack of sustainability issue here. In emotional terms, they do want their children to go into farming. They feel a huge sense of loss that many of their children will not remain in their communities, will go off because that will give them better economic opportunities. And of course, if we don't have farmers, we haven't actually found a better way of producing food. So we need these people as well. We have to tackle these issues together. And I think the common values, the common principles, and the common ways of working towards best practice are the same in fair trade as they are in organic. So I hope that more and more people on my side of the fence and on yours will look at getting out of those silos and actually taking that fence down and saying we need to work better together. It's not just a case of having more impact through our work. It's not just a case of being more effective and efficient in the things that we do. It actually reflects the nature of the challenges. So the big global challenges of climate change, of real sustainability, do not respect national borders. They are just lines on a map. And of course, we can see that in one of the biggest problems that in Europe we're seeing at this very moment, in terms of people shifting for a better life. Now, whether it's because of they're refugees from war, whether it's because they cannot survive economically in their own country, I think doesn't make a difference. This is what happens when you have inequality. Things will work towards that level. So we cannot simply work in our silos, and we cannot just work within national boundaries. I think together we can promote that more holistic vision. And in terms of a quote, people have mentioned with Einstein, I was going to finish with a quote from Martin Luther King, who 50 years ago said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." So our challenges are your challenges are our challenges, and I think we can resolve them if we work together. Thank you.
Thank you, David. In the organic structure today, one can be organic certified and still have slaves in his farm. And one of the people who are looking into that now is David Gould, who is the next speaker. David is from Portland, US. He is the coordinator of Organic 0.3. He's got years of experience. David?
Thanks, Guy. So, I'm slated to talk tomorrow, actually, as well, and I have to admit I'm a bit of a substitute at a late notice. So I'm going to try not to repeat what I'm going to say tomorrow, even though there are actually overlapping topics here. I'm going to keep my messages pretty simple, and that's not only for the purposes of time, but it's also deliberate because I think we need to really simplify our messages if we want to be able to communicate them, transmit them to other people, and have them actually embody the same kind of thoughts that we're having. We do very well at agreeing on a lot of these topics, but we are still a very small group, and we need to be able to get more people to embody and carry out the same kinds of behaviors that we're talking about here. And for the last, I've been doing this for 20 plus years, and the biggest question that I have asked myself for probably the last 15 is, if we really want to change the world, it's going to take more than us, and where are we going to find all those people to do it? And how are we going to teach them what we know? What are the essential messages that we want to get across, and what are the behaviors that we want to have change? And so what I'm going to talk about here are relatively general kinds of systemic changes and attitudes that I think we need to embody, and hopefully give also a few clues of how we might institutionalize those in our market frameworks, and also just in the way that we try to communicate those with one another. And one of the things I think we also need, and one of our challenges as a movement, is that we have a lot of grassroots organizations working on similar great ideas in parallel, and those parallel tracks don't meet, which means we repeat our efforts and we don't converge and synergize. And I see this as I have to say, a colossal waste of our energy in some ways. And I understand why that happens, but I think it's a challenge that we all have to be better, more communicative with each other, so that we can be a little bit more powerful and unified in how we put forth our messages to the world. And when we talk about fairness, we're talking about changing people. And we're talking about changing attitudes. And I'm not a very patient person. I want to see the world change, and I want to see action taken. So I'm hoping that I can help give a few clues about actions that we might actually be able to take as a movement, and attitudes that we might be able to embody as individuals. Because as I said, this is really about people. And the person who I'm substituting for is Helmi Abuleish from Sept. And I have to say, I kind of feel like a little bit of a poor replacement for one of my mentors, really. Sept is a groundbreaking operation in Egypt. I think probably most of you know it. This is an embodiment. This picture is a symbol of what happens at Sept daily about joining people. It is in some ways the epitome of what we want to see as fairness in an operation, and how it engenders a sense of teamwork and unity and happiness among people. It's, as Helmi would call it, and his father called it, it's an economy of love. And when we talk about how change happens in our world, and how the evolution of our species happens, it's happening faster, but really it's a slow process, and changing people's minds and attitudes about how they treat other people is very much an interpersonal act. And defining fairness, as Ian said, is a little bit tricky to do. I think we can bring some kinds of rules or structures around that, but most of the real change in getting people to treat each other fairly is an interpersonal act, and it follows essentially on the fundamental law that Helmi and his people follow, which is essentially that the more you give, the more you get. Well, Nadia put this up, and we've seen it a lot, so if organic agriculture should build on relationships that ensure fairness with regard to the common environment and life opportunities, that's the principle of fairness. And if you look more at the text, there's a few phrases that I pulled out of it. Food sovereignty is talked about as an aspect of fairness, reduction of poverty, treatment of animals, and natural and environmental resources. And what I would like to say about this is that fairness happens on a person-to-person level. It happens on a business-to-business level, and that includes farmers being enterprises and businesses, and it happens on a country-to-country basis. And it's not only within our species. You might be able to think of perhaps, I guess, some food sustainability of producing eggs with chickens in cages, and you might be able to do that for a long time, but that's not fair to the animals. It does not acknowledge our connection to the rest of life and to nature. And as we all know, the principles are all intertwined with one another. So thinking institutionally about how we might embody fairness, we need to recognize that we are all interdependent. We know that without farmers, we're not going to have any food or not enough food. We know that without our environment, we're not going to be able to actually produce that food. And one of the systemic problems that we have as a movement and as a market structure is that we have adopted a structure which is actually not compatible with the principle of fairness. About 30 years ago, more or less, the organic sector and market was quite young and was growing and wanted to be legitimized by a dominant global business paradigm that didn't take us seriously and essentially wanted to see what we had to show them that would make them think that we were something that they could deal with, that they actually wanted to pay attention to. And quite frankly, we didn't really have any other answers about it. So we adopted this ISO model of supply chain compliance. And that is a supply chain model as opposed to the principle of fairness, which would talk about a value chain model. A value chain model implies interdependence across that chain from primary producer all the way to consumer in both directions so that all of those links get their fair share. In the supply chain model, what we have are individual links in a chain that are covered by a certificate of compliance, which is the most common way that we see it now. And each link essentially fends for itself. There's a lot of competition in the market. As one of my colleagues would call that organized irresponsibility. In a value chain model, what we would say instead is that there's shared responsibility and we need to make sure that especially the primary producing end of the chain actually can do what it needs to do to survive and do the right thing, and that we recognize that and are willing to somehow pay or sacrifice or give to it. You know, it's in some ways, sometimes I think there's maybe a fatal flaw in our organism. I mean, we're programmed a lot like rats, and we act a lot like rats, and physiologically we're mammals like them, and we should maybe look to the bees that we're all killing, where they actually, I mean, people are not so good with being drones, but at the same time they look out for the whole community, and we need to embody that a little bit more. And one of the ways in which we can do that is through embodying transparency and letting everybody know what we're doing. Now, as Pablo said this morning, we can't be afraid to try and really shake things up or change the dominant paradigm in which we find ourselves. So one of the institutional or systemic changes that we can make is we can say, you know, that ISO model that we adopted, it worked. We're taken seriously. It has served us to this point in time. But if we want to grow out of our little niche, we need to be able to do it in a way which actually embodies our principles, because the lack of being able to pay attention to our principles through regulations or other market mechanisms is holding us back from really realizing our objectives. So we need to be able to say we are strong enough now to stand on our own 2 feet, and we have alternatives, whereas maybe 30 years ago we didn't. And a lot of what Organic 3.0 is about is trying to find some ways to do that. Another systemic attitude that needs to change, or a practice that doesn't happen enough, is whenever we have these discussions, it's almost like we forget the main reason we're doing things, and we fail to come to agreement, especially with parties at the table who don't necessarily agree with us in the details of what we do. We need to get them to agree on what are the common goals that we all have as a species, as a society. Part of Organic 3.0 is about being inclusive, starting with like-minded movements, but ultimately being able to infiltrate the entire sector with organic ideas, organic principles, and to understand that we all live on this one planet, and that's all we've got right now. We have natural resources which are our common goods, and we need to be able to share those in a way which is equitable, which is fair, and which also allows us to share the knowledge that we have with each other so that we can figure out how to solve some of these newer problems. Actually, I love this as a visual aid here. I'm going to turn it a little bit. This is the best practice flower. Came out of the best practice guideline. The Soil and More Sustainability flower is actually benchmarked to be compliant with this now. It's said in a slightly different way. But the principle of fairness actually touches on all of the dimensions of sustainability of the flower. The ecological part we've talked about, but in terms of society, that's somewhat obvious. In terms of economy, we've talked about fair prices. In terms of accountability, telling the story, or in terms of culture, how we actually respect each other and respect our diversity among us. And if we look at these different dimensions, one of the newer dimensions, and Bernard talked about this morning, is should we have something about culture or as part of the principle of care or something in addition to it? I think one of the genius contributions of SOAN is this concept of bringing culture in, and this is actually, Helmi is a champion of this idea, so I really want to acknowledge him for showing us the way on that. And when trying to get clear on this issue, once upon a time, I was talking with him, and as he said, the way he described the difference between culture and the cultural dimension and the societal dimension is, in the societal dimension, we would really talk about equality and human rights. But in the cultural dimension, really what we're doing is celebrating our diversity and knowing that there is wealth in that diversity, and that we have different belief systems, different traditions, different models of the universe. Whether you're an Einsteinian type of physicist, and that's the way you look at the physical world, or you believe in Ayurveda, or in traditional Chinese medicine, or in any other form of a holistic model of the universe, there are rational ways within those models, within those belief systems, that allow you to function. And some of those systems have things to offer that other ones do not, and we need to acknowledge that one is not necessarily more right than the other. So when we talk about fairness and we talk about being able to allow differences in culture, we're knowing that what we have is different knowledge systems, which then give us different kinds of inspiration, which lead us to different kinds of innovation that are context-specific or topic-specific, and they also allow us to appreciate the beauty of life, whether that beauty comes in a visual form or in the taste of an egg from a chicken that grew up on eating grass and bugs, more than being in a cage, for instance. We talk in terms of Organic 3.0, wanting to be innovative and to embrace science more and show the world that we're not so dogmatic. But I would ask you, what is science? And is there only one form of science? In our different cultural models of the universe that we see around the world, there are different sciences that may be valid. And we need to be able to acknowledge what are holistic systems, which systems actually are compatible with all the four principles of agriculture. If we decide that they are, then they are actually having a chance at being fair. If we look at the economic dimension, well, we talked about fair prices. And the reality is we talk about chains, and one of the things you say about chains is you can't push a chain, you can only pull it. Right? And one of the things that we have tended to do over the years with farmers, we need to be more sustainable, and so we say to the farmers, you do all of these things, and now you got some more extra things to do, and we'll basically buy the product from you as cheaply as we can so we can compete in the market with it. Right? And that way we'll still be able to buy your product. But the reality is that we are not paying farmers to really necessarily be good farmers. We're not paying, the market distortion of the dominant global paradigm pays people for doing the wrong thing, for exploiting natural resources, for exploiting labor, for taking health risks, and we need to change that. And one of the systemic ways we can change that is we could actually build into standards and regulations an attitude and a practice among those who are buying products that they have to actually support those farmers who are doing the best jobs on the ground to maintain the stability, the sustainability of their systems through the kinds of agroecological methods that Miguel was talking about this morning, ones which really preserve the sustainability of the resource, and as well as reward them for being innovative, for being able to produce better, so we can use, it doesn't have to be a purely ecological, hedonistic type of motivation, that we can build in economic kinds of incentives as well. But we need to be able to put responsibility on the supply chain, on the value chain, where it is due. And we each have different, each link has different kinds of responsibilities. As Nadia pointed out, and as some others have pointed out, unless we pay the real cost of these foods, these products, I'm almost done. Unless we pay the real cost of these, then we're not going to be sustainable. And one of the things I think, one of our challenges is the science of true cost accounting is still young, it's improving fast, we're getting very interesting results out of it, but we need it to be applicable by farmers as well. We need these systems to be accessible, otherwise it's just going to remain an academic exercise. So we need to make sure that it is scientifically sound, but we need to translate those costs into a distilled set of practices that lead to the outcomes that we say that we want, that cost less. And those practices are not going to look, I don't think at least, not going to look like the academic true cost accounting calculation. But the practices themselves can then be studied to see what their impacts are and vetted with the true cost accounting methodology and theory that we have, and then there can be a continuous loop of feedback to refine both sides of that. We need to make sure, though, that that involves input from farmers as well as from the scientific community and as well as the policymakers, so that they each get the right use out of a true cost accounting framework. Now, the missing piece in all of this, and something that we have not been very good at as a sector, is reaching consumers. We need to get them involved and educate them about what their role in the cycle is. We won't have fairness, really, if we don't have transparency across the board. It's our duty, it's our responsibility to educate people more about what it is that we're trying to do and what their role is in it, and allow them enough information to be able to make an informed choice about what they're doing. Knowledge is power, and the only reason you have to fear that is if you're doing something which is against the common good. Thanks.
Thank you, David. On a previous conversation I had with David earlier today, he told me that we are a mouse who wants to be an elephant. And I think even if we want to be a rabbit, the flag of fairness is a flag that we should carry and carry high. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you to everybody. Now we are, if there are not immediate questions and okay, things, we are moving to the parallel session, let's say, phase. Up to now, we are going to start, the first slot will be should be half from now in 1 hour and a quarter, and we will have 2 parallel sessions. One is ecological sustainability of organic agriculture that will be placed in this room in the plenary, and another one that is networking that will be held in room A that is outside when we go in the near the cafeteria, the place where we had coffee break, straight. So there is a room there. Then we will have coffee break again together, and please also have a look at the poster session, because not all the contributions were able to be oral, so there are very interesting contributions that are shown outside in the poster session. And then there will be a final afternoon session of another 1 hour and a quarter with 3 other parallel sessions. One is soil, plant, animal, and food health that will be held here in the plenary. Then we will have action, research, and learning in room A outside, and a third one in Italian dealing with the local seed project activity. So I wish good work, and I would like to thank the scientific community and also the other, let's say, the organization, the scientific committee and also the organization committee for the work. We have in total 34 papers, and it was, I think, a huge work. And tomorrow, let's say, as soon as the conference will finish, we will upload everything in organic print. It was really impossible to do it before, so I excuse with the authors, but we will do it since Monday. And then we will, together with a committee and the editor of the journal, probably select some papers for not special issue, but anyhow the submitted to one organic agricultural journal and to New Medit journal. So we will go on with the process, okay, for increase the scientific level of the conference. So thank you very much.